Hi, welcome to News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. Today is Monday, March 19th, 2018. I'm Zev Friedman. I have two guests with me today. We have Justin Holt and Zev Friedman, fresh from Kudzu camp in Dillsboro. And we're going to be talking with them in just a minute here. I have a couple of announcements to make. Next Saturday, March 24th, the Poor People's Campaign is coming to Silva, and we're going to have a town hall at the community table from 3 to 5 p.m. And I hope you can all make it out. This is a very inspiring event. The Poor People's Campaign was actually something started by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Just prior to his assassination in 1968. And the work was carried on by Ralph Abernathy for a while until his death. And then, since then, nobody has really taken the mantle of the Poor People's Campaign, although it's continued to exist until now. And Dr. William Barber II, who is formerly the president of the North Carolina NAACP, has taken the mantle of the national organization of the Poor People's Campaign and has completely re-energized it. And town halls are springing up all over the country right now, and it's becoming a powerful campaign and a powerful movement. So it's coming to Silva on next Saturday, the 24th of March, and please come to the community table from 3 to 5. I have here a note from 1,000 Trees for Western North Carolina.
Fruit trees, I think.
1,000 fruit trees, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Fruit tree planting service by Holt Tree Permaculture. The person to contact is Danu Macon at holttreepermaculture@gmail.com to increase the fruiting capacity of Western North Carolina. This is for landowners who desire fruit trees from Useful Plants Nursery. There are 40 species of organic apples, pears, service berries, etc. 40 species that are available. Services on a sliding scale based on need and income. Children's participation is encouraged. So again, if you're interested in that program and participating in it, please contact holttreepermaculture@gmail.com. That's WHOLETREE permaculture, one word, @gmail.com. Okay. So, Kudzu Camp. This is the 7th annual Kudzu Camp that we've just completed.
Kudzu Root Camp.
This was Kudzu Root Camp. Yeah, explain what that means, please.
Yeah, Kudzu Root Camp, because a few years ago we started Kudzu Vine Camp, and so we're now doing 2 Kudzu camps a year. And during the winter, late winter typically for us and our schedules, we get together in the Kudzu patch here in Silva, and we harvest kudzu roots and then process them for their amazingly medicinal and delicious kudzu starch, the root starch. And as well as other products, we harvest some roots for drying and using for medicine as whole roots, and use some of the byproduct or co-product cold extraction tea that comes out as part of extracting the starch for medicine also. And generally have a really beautiful, fun time getting together with people and kind of creating and exploring kudzu culture.
And we've begun supplying roots to herbalists and traditional Chinese medicinal practitioners who already use kudzu root as a primary herb in traditional Chinese medicine, but most of it's coming from China, where the pollution is extreme and it's hard to get reliably sourced roots that are clean. So we've been beginning to supply roots as well to folks that they know are clean and relatively unpolluted. That's a nice thing to be able to do.
Do you know of anybody else that's doing this in America?
Don't know of anybody else who's doing it.
Definitely not the way we're doing it. Yeah. I think there are people who are using kudzu in all kinds of ways and have kind of like dabbled in it.
Their own personal use, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But what we're trying to do is really look at how kudzu can become a real, actual, economically beneficial and useful crop for people.
Yeah.
And so we think that in order to make it happen, we're kind of drawing on how it has happened traditionally in Asia, in Japan in particular, but also in China and Taiwan and Korea, where people work in kind of like a village scale and kind of a cooperative setting to kind of distribute. It's pretty labor intensive, and it's worth the work, but you need more people involved than just a single farmer who has some kudzu. We think to make it viable.
Right. So we formed a kudzu co-op. It's a collective group to use the group ability and dynamics of different personalities and skill sets, as well as just the brute force of labor to do the kind of complex process involved in harvesting kudzu well and making starch from it. And that we think that collaborative scale is really necessary. And going along with what Justin's saying about the economy of kudzu and how there are existing industries in Southeast Asia and in Japan around every part of the kudzu plant. In the U.S., when kudzu was brought over from Asia, it didn't get brought along with the culture of use. And so just like with corn, when corn growing in a mixture of crops and a whole mosaic of land use management was one of the most sustainable forms of farming on the planet when Native Americans were doing it. But then corn got taken out of its cultural context and a kind of sacred relationship with the people through industrial farming, and now corn is one of the most destructive forces on the planet because people took the seeds but didn't take the respect and the culture of use and relationship and land awareness that goes with it. And so what we're saying is that's a pattern with plants on this planet and with human interaction with them. If we take corn or sugar cane or tobacco or cotton and take those things out of their cultural context, which passes down knowledge of how to manage them sustainably and how to use them sustainably, then that thing becomes a poison in our bodies and in the landscape rather than a medicine in our bodies and the landscape. And so kudzu is the same thing. It was brought here without the culture of use, and so humans didn't have an incentive or an awareness of managing it in the landscape like it's managed in Asia, and so it became a poison in the landscape. It became a poison for our whole ecosystem here rather than the medicine that it actually is capable of providing, both in ecological healing and in human healing. And so we're trying to develop kudzu culture in the Southern Appalachians. That's why our website is kudzuculture.net.
And that, so this is again the 7th year that you do. What type of response have you received from on your web page, on Facebook page, and how are people reacting in various ways? I imagine to what you're doing.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting. We get a lot of support from a lot of people. A lot of people are really interested to learn that kudzu has anything redeeming about it at all. And there's also, a lot of people who are pretty reactionary about the idea of embracing an invasive species and, doing anything other than maligning it. And so, we've had some rich Facebook debates with folks, but for the most part, people are really supportive and really interested to come and be a part of kudzu camp whenever they can. And actually, we just got an email the other day while we were at camp, and it mentioned this to you. Someone from Swananoa who's really excited about what we're doing. He said, "I wish I had millions of dollars to support you, but I'm broke, and I can offer you acupuncture for an hour.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Kind of appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of nice press coverage recently. You know, the Mountain Express did a nice piece, and the Laurel did a nice piece on kudzu.
Smoky Mountain News.
Smoky Mountain News came out
to kudzu camp.
Yeah, right.
It'll come out this week, right?
Right.
The article in the Smoky
Oh, yeah,
Mountain
okay.
News. Yeah, we had a reporter actually
Yeah.
Yeah.
at the kudzu camp.
Uh-huh.
And the Asheville Citizen Times did a front page article last year.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
On interviewed Justin and
Mhm.
yeah. And just to be clear, we're not for the audience here. We're not advocating at all the planting of kudzu. We're simply advocating working with existing patches of kudzu, and we're noting, hey, look at the way that kudzu behaves and climbs up into trees on the edges of kudzu clearings and everything, and that it's not getting managed. And most herbicides don't even work on kudzu, even though governments and certain agencies continue to advocate herbicides. They usually don't even work. And so we're saying, look, if you want to have a pragmatic approach to limiting the impact of kudzu in native ecosystems, the best way is incentivizing humans to take action for their own benefit, i.e. harvest kudzu and thereby control the patches and understand the dynamics of kudzu and working with it, which we've been learning a lot about through these past 7 years, is the dynamics of kudzu in an ecosystem and in a semi-forested landscape and how we might bring it back into balance. So that's what we're going for, not planting new kudzu.
So go into that a little bit more specifically about what are the benefits of kudzu? How can it be used, or some of the ways it can be used, both the root and the green part of the plant?
Yeah. Well, to start with, just in the landscape, the way it was used initially in the United States was for erosion control, and that was in response to severely eroding soils here in the southeast after a couple centuries of steep slope agriculture and grazing, and you know, there was really an erosion crisis, and so kudzu is very good at holding soil in place and putting down a lot of roots really quickly. And it's also a nitrogen fixer, so it's pulling nitrogen out of the atmosphere and actually making it available in the soil. And so there's actually below that leafy mass a nice layer of rich, fluffy topsoil. And so that was why kudzu actually expanded so much throughout the southeast, is that it was actually planted by the U.S. government and
Civilian Conservation Corps
Right.
and by other agencies, yeah.
They're actually paying people to plant kudzu on millions of acres.
Because our economic activity was so focused on extractive farming and extractive logging in the United States, and digging highways through mountainsides and railways through mountainsides and farming on steep slopes and pasturing on steep slopes, all those things caused massive erosion and loss of topsoil, and so that then opened up a niche for something like kudzu to live in, which is a fast-growing vine that prevents erosion and restores soil. That's why it was planted in the first place. Yeah,
and then farmers were grazing their livestock on it and figured out that it's very high quality pasture and
about equivalent to alfalfa in protein content. Yeah.
And you know, and then if you go further back and you look at how it's used in Japan and in traditional Chinese medicine, there is a whole enormous, vast range of medicinal and culinary uses.
For instance.
So in the cuisine in Japan, it's used as a thickener. It has properties very similar. This is the refined kudzu starch from the roots, which the roots are about 5% starch per the volume of the root.
5% dry starch to wet root. So yeah, by weight. Yeah.
And so it's used to make like thick tofu-like preparations or gelled desserts or like puddings. You can use it to thicken soups, things like that.
Yeah, and also there's some kinds of textures that are not even present in most Western cuisine. Like there's this drink that is translated as a cream from Japanese cuisine. It's like in between a drink and a pudding kind of. So it's a drinkable thing, but it's very soothing to the mouth and digestive tract, which is one of the themes of Kudzu cuisine. Is that it's a food as medicine, or a medicine as food. It's a medicinal food that is most renowned for soothing digestive issues and inflamed tissues, like mucous membranes, like for people who get...
So it's an anti-inflammatory.
At least on indirect contact with inflamed tissues. And so if people have canker sores or stomach ulcers, or anything like that, or even I've used it if I've inhaled too much campfire smoke, to use Kudzu creams to soothe my throat. And so it's just this soothing thing that kind of takes down pain and inflammation and helps the body to heal. And that's one of the themes of its medicinal uses, but also eating foods that do that. So you can make a drink that's called a cream. One of my favorite recipes is one that is from Japan, which is an ume cream. Umeboshi plum is a certain type of apricot, actually, that's salt fermented and pickled. And then to make this drink, you dice those plums up and cook them in water with fresh ginger juice and shoyu, which is like a authentic soy sauce, and then you thicken it with a little bit of the kudzu starch, like Justin was talking about. And if I ever have any stomach upset or digestion gone awry, this drink helps within 20 minutes. It's really effective and delicious. So, but there's a whole cuisine, hundreds of different recipes for the way the starch is used. There's an anecdote that in World War II, when the Japanese food supply was in short supply, that a lot of people living out in the mountains in Japan ate lots of kudzu roots just by roasting them like sweet potatoes because they were short on food, and that cured a lot of their stomach diseases by the end of the war. Just an anecdote, yeah.
And so, as I understand it, one of the reasons kudzu has this property is its high calcium content. So therefore it's alkalide,
right,
in nature, and as opposed to many other cooking starches like cornstarch or arrowroot powder, which are acidic,
right,
ultimately. But kudzu is very assimilable into the body, and it tends to help your body balance its pH, which has all kinds of positive health manifestations for human beings.
Yeah, do you want me to speak to that?
Yeah, blood sugar thing.
Yeah, so the whole other that absolutely, and that's a whole other additional theme of kudzu medicine is there's this whole interrelationship, and not to go too deep into the science geek part of it, although that's fun for all of us. But how the relationship of bones and teeth to the blood sugar cycle, and so it's kudzu starch helps the body to exert less effort to maintain a balanced pH. And what I mean by that is that the human body has to stay in our bloodstream. We have to stay at a pH of 7.1 or we die. So the body has to do whatever it has to do to maintain that pH. There are certain foods that we eat that tend to acidify the blood, and so then, which includes most of the Western diet, meats and sugars and alcohol and caffeine and most carbohydrate sources like rice and wheat and corn. And so when we eat those foods, the body has to find ions like calcium and magnesium from somewhere to neutralize that acidifying tendency. The place we find it is in our bones and teeth. So we mine those things out of our bones and teeth. And if we ate a balanced diet, then we would return those minerals back to the bones and teeth from the blood after that. But we don't. We keep acidifying, so then those things get bound up and excreted out, actually. And so it leads to osteoporosis and tooth decay. Kudzu helps to diminish that effect, and it also regulates blood sugar cycles. So if we eat kudzu with other foods, it helps us to digest all the sugars and carbohydrates more evenly and slowly, so that instead of getting a blood sugar spike, we get this kind of slow release of blood sugar. And blood sugar spikes also lead to acidification and therefore leaching of calcium from the bones and teeth. So it helps in both those ways, directly through the minerals, but also through the blood sugar. Yeah.
And so Eastern medicine tends to recognize this, although maybe not in those terms.
Right.
But they do recognize the benefit of overall human health too, and so kudzu is used and is highly valued. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
Even though it's abundant.
Yeah.
But of course, because there is this consciousness about the value of kudzu in Japan and in Taiwan and in Korea and in China, and maybe other Far Eastern countries, it has gained the value.
Yeah.
And it, unlike here, it's not a problem in terms of
getting out of control.
Completely being out of control, because the problem is stopping people from harvesting it too quickly so it doesn't disappear.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of the problem we want to create here.
Yeah, exactly. We want a new problem.
Yeah, we want to exchange problems.
And we were actually reading an article that in China, because the population has become more urbanized, that only recently is kudzu becoming a problem, because there are areas in the landscape where humans have been managing kudzu for a long time and now are fleeing the rural areas into the cities
because of the urbanization
and abandoning, which is the same thing that happened here. Do you want to speak to that history?
Right, yeah. It's like I was saying, it was planted extensively throughout the southeast to prevent erosion, and farmers are growing it for livestock, fodder and pasture, and basically what happened was at World War II, people left their farms to go fight in the war. They came back, and after post-World War II, our whole farming system was industrialized, and people started to move into cities and away from farms, and the relationship they had with the kudzu, where they would be managing it through livestock grazing, was broken, and so that was right around the time when the relationship to kudzu started to change. You know, all throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s. Or early 40s, kudzu was regarded kind of as the savior of the South, and it wasn't until by the mid 1950s the government said we can't plant any more kudzu, and then by the 70s it was then regarded as a noxious weed. It was top of the invasive species list.
I wonder if part of that consciousness also stems from the fact that we fought against Japan in World War II, and there was a cultural bias against. It was like, this is how Japan is getting back at us. There's nothing good about this plant. There's nothing good about Japan. There's nothing good. Everything that's made in Japan is cheap. I don't know if you remember that, but no, you probably before. But when I was growing up, everything that was made in Japan, it was like everything that's made in China now, although that's passing, but it was considered cheap and no good, and and that was the stigma that it had. And so I think that label was kind of attached to kudzu as well as being from another culture and not an un-American sort of thing, And so people didn't even want to entertain the thought that this could be a beneficial plant.
Yeah. There's a remarkable similarity between the energy of anti-invasive plant rhetoric and the energy of anti-human immigrant rhetoric.
Yeah.
There's a remarkable similarity between it. And I would say that there are major shifts necessary in both of those types of consciousness, which are related to each other.
Yeah.
It has to do with a lack of understanding how culture grows and change, and ecosystems grow and change over time, and a kind of a xenophobia that resists adaptation and change and combination, and wants to keep things the same always.
So we want people to think of kudzu as the new Toyota of plants. Long-term sustainability.
This is the Prius
Yeah, the Prius. The Prius of plants.
Kudzu is the Prius.
Yeah, that's
Right.
a nice one.
Heard it through the kudzu bomb.
Yeah. Hey, this is news from the roots. News from the Kudzu roots.
That's right, news from the roots. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so one of the things we're trying to do to help it be the Prius is through this Kudzu co-op that we mentioned earlier, to try to see if we can create a model that can be replicable in other places, so that communities can come together where there's Kudzu and figure out how to do exactly what we're doing, come into relationship with it, manage it, harvest it, and heal themselves and their community through this kind of coming together and using it for food, and food as medicine. And one of the things we're trying to do currently is to look at scaling up just somewhat. We've been doing it mostly like as low tech as possible at this point, and I think that's probably limiting for its replicability in other places. So we're looking to work with other people who might be inclined toward fabrication and mechanization of things, and we're
Some parts of it.
some parts of it. Yeah, just there's like a few key kind of bottlenecks in the process. So just to go through briefly
Chopping it
the
and
process,
grinding
it's like
it.
we need to hand dig it here in the mountains,
Yeah.
which I don't see a way to mechanize that really in this kind of setting, but maybe further
Not without
south
creating
in
massive
Piedmont.
soil erosion.
Right.
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 Or using drones.
Yeah, robotic diggers.
Joke.
Right, like with the little claw.
Yeah, yeah, like the game,
Right.
the teddy bears, like the Kudzu roots. We could probably have kids operating them from remote locations.
See, this is
actually.
fun for the whole family.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, yeah, and so maybe there's some way to mechanize the digging part, but really and then so we wash them and then we chop them up. So that part could probably be worked into some kind of mechanical system, and then it's the pounding. So after the roots are chopped, then we pound them up into a mash that looks exactly like pulled pork. And every year someone makes the same joke about how we should start a pulled pork business, a vegan barbecue, and that process I think is probably the most labor-intensive bottleneck that we want to address through some kind of
If it was ground up in
appropriate
some
technology.
way, some mechanically, I mean, it would accomplish the same. It doesn't have to be pounded.
No.
It just needs to
The
be
fibers
shredded.
need
It
to be
needs to be separated.
Right. The
So-
roots are very
so some kind of
fibrous. So
Elaborate apple
Exactly.
press or something
Yeah.
like that.
yeah. Zev's daydreaming about a bike-powered thing that has
Yeah.
a few different connections to it. Some kind of Dr. Seuss machine.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, we actually we just put in we just put in a grant application that would get funding for a first set of prototypes of these bike-powered kudzu processing machines, and we've had conversations about just like there are mobile processing units for poultry that can drive around and allow people with poultry farms to process their chickens or ducks and then sell them. Maybe there could be a trailer that is a mobile kudzu processing unit that different people could rent or something like that to do kudzu processing on different properties throughout the winter, so that not everyone would have to have $10,000 or $15,000 worth of equipment. But if we could get it down, then it would make it much more efficient and allow, like Justin is saying, other kudzu co-ops around the region to make this as a major food and medicine source for themselves and possibly cottage industry. So yeah.
That's a good idea.
And luckily again there are many functioning systems of this nature in Southeast Asia and Japan. And another thing that we've talked about a lot is how good it would be to actually get funding to send a group of researchers over there to do some deep traveling and understanding of the techniques, both from farming to harvesting to processing, that they use there, where they've been doing it for hundreds of years. And so we really talked about, wow, that would be good. The last book that was written about kudzu was the Book of Kudzu in the late 70s, and we've gone through most of the information in there and applied it and learned a lot ourselves. We feel like we could really ask some good questions now and go and learn a lot from those people who've been doing it. So if anyone out there wants to help to fund a kudzu culture research trip, we're open to that.
Yeah, or if someone has connections in those parts of the world and could set us up with someone who could be our guide and take us around,
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually spoke to the author, one of the authors of the Book of Kudzu. One night I was there.
Yeah.
That was
William Shirtliff.
William Shirtliff.
Yeah.
Looked him up on the internet.
Yeah.
He was working at the University of California in Berkeley.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's try calling him up. And,
Yeah.
and you did, and he was there.
Yeah.
And he talked with us for about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And gave us some good feedback.
Yeah, and he basically said that he and his wife wrote the entire book of kudzu from about 4 weeks of experience that they had when they were in Japan, and they observed different kudzu processes, and that was all the information that went into that book. And so imagine if a group of people went back for a couple of months with a lot of specific questions, we could probably learn a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be quite exciting.
And that would help jumpstart the processes here, and how, depending on the statistics you read, there are anywhere between 700,000 acres and 8 million acres of kudzu in the southeast U.S.
Pretty good
It's
spread,
quite a spread.
Order of
That would be another thing, is if there's anyone out there who has access to any accurate information on that, because the U.S. Forest Service, even, we found different quotes within the U.S. Forest Service documents, but even if it's at the low end, 700,000 acres, that's a lot of kudzu. 700,000 acres.
Yeah.
So it's, regardless of which end of that spectrum it's at, it's a huge existing resource. An ally, I would say.
And it's a resource almost unlike any other in that because it proliferates at such a rate, that can be a demon, that can be a terrible problem. Or if you look at, if it's a resource, it's a tremendous replenishing resource that's drought proof.
Yeah.
You can't kill kudzu by depriving it of water, because its roots go down so far into the ground that it just basically draws from the water table.
Well.
And it proliferates at such a high rate, and so, one of the things I've thought about for kudzu is making paper out of it. Instead of cutting trees down, every 2 weeks you cut the kudzu, which literally grows at a foot a day, the vines do, in the heat of the summer. I mean, so it's almost unending how much you can harvest from it.
Yeah, and it bears mentioning, this is a plant of a climate changing future too.
Yeah.
So this is like you said, it's drought tolerant to an incredible degree, and also I read a study about different plants were subjected to higher levels of atmospheric CO2 and higher temperatures, and among the plants that really thrived in those higher levels were poison ivy and kudzu.
Right. So imagine a year when we have no rain during the summer because of climate change induced drought.
Yeah.
Because everybody's corn plants are going to be dying.
Yeah.
Even many fruit trees won't withstand that kind of drought and produce fruit. But kudzu has these deep tap roots, and they live for many years, so they're there to be harvested
all
as
year
food.
round.
Exactly. It's a very resilient, what people are referring to as resilient food source for unpredictable future climate and weather extremes, which is really important.
It's really just a question of learning how to use it. And I've used it. I have this 3 acres of kudzu on my land, and I found that you can take the leaves, even mature leaves, put them in a blender with water, and make sort of a soup stock out of it, and so you can use that as a base for a soup.
Yeah.
And it's 23% protein. 23%, which I believe is higher than alfalfa, isn't it? It's actually, I've read, the highest protein content of any green leafy vegetable on earth.
I don't know about that, but there's some other ones that have really high ones too, but it's certainly really high.
Yeah. It's a very high protein content and just nutritious and good for you. And you combine that with the root, it's just very healthy food to have around and resilient. And
Yeah.
If you had to, you could probably survive on kudzu.
Yeah, I've also dried the leaves and then powdered them, and we use that in masa and tamale dough at Kudzu Vine Camp a couple years ago, if you recall. We actually wrapped the little tamales in fresh kudzu leaves and steamed them. They were really good.
Really good.
And I've been using that dried powdered kudzu leaf in soups and so on. Pretty small amounts because it's pretty strong flavor, but still. And then we should speak to the fiber as well.
Right, I was just going to get into
You want to
that,
go?
Yeah. So I mentioned at the beginning that we do Kudzu Root Camp in the winter, and then in the summer we have Kudzu Vine Camp, and the dates for that are July 20th through the 22nd. And what we'll be doing,
2018,
so
year.
this summer, just a few months.
Right now,
All right, good.
Yeah.
July
Everybody
20th
pull your
through
phones out and put it in
22nd,
your
2018. That's right.
What?
I was just telling the viewers to do the same thing you're doing. You're
Yeah.
modeling.
And check out kudzuculture.net for more information on that.
Yeah, and so what we do at that camp is we harvest the vines, the current season's growth, and we cook them and then put them into fermentation. It takes a couple weeks in a retting process where it's fermented so that the vine, the different layers of fibers separate off from each other. And what we're going for there is a bast fiber, the fiber kind of just underneath the bark of the vine that is this incredibly lustrous, like really beautiful, shiny, silk-like fiber once it's all cleaned and processed. And that can be used for weaving clothing and grass cloth, which is a kind of popular wall hanging in Korea, and it has all kinds of uses that you can come up with for any kind of fiber applications. And so we've
Basketry.
Right. So the core fiber which is kind of a byproduct of that process, makes nice baskets. I made a nice, it's a really nice kind of bright white color. And so that was actually, the very first way that we're aware of from the archaeological record that kudzu was used, and for thousands of years has been used through in China and in Japan. And actually it was so common in China that there was a certain period of time in one of the dynasties in China where the commoners were referred to as basically kudzu cloth people. So the word for kudzu cloth was the same word for commoner. So that was like, the clothing of the time was people were wearing kudzu.
Instead of sackcloth.
Yeah. Right.
Then you get, now, we have, our audience knows Jeff Gottlieb because he has a show on Mountain Stream TV.
Oh, yeah. Great.
It's called Earth Skills, his show.
Oh, cool.
And he has built a house out of kudzu.
Right.
Out of kudzu bales. So it provides housing, clothing, food.
And Jeff came to kudzu camp and showed us how to make kudzu rope.
Yeah.
From the older growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Kudzu Vine Camp is really fun because we do spend some time harvesting the roots, and you can harvest the flowers at that time. Which
You did roots.
I mean the vines.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Spend some time harvesting the vines and harvest some flowers, which are this incredible kind
a whole other
great,
world of use with flowers.
medicinal and culinary uses. That kind of one of the classic uses for kudzu in the South is kudzu flower jelly.
Right.
That's like one of the only ways that that people who do use kudzu tend to use it. And we actually spend most of the time with our feet in the creek, though, just washing vines, and that's the most labor-intensive part of the fiber extraction is after they've been retted, getting them clean from basically removing everything you don't want, all of the pith and the bark, and then separating the inner and outer fibers. And so it's a lot of fun. It sounds like, I don't want to go be cutting kudzu vines in the heat of the July sun, but really we spend most of our time in the creek playing in the water. So it's a whole lot of fun.
Would you describe what retting is again?
That's the fermentation process.
Okay.
There's a couple different ways to do it, and we've been experimenting. The traditional way is to dig a pit, and then they boil the kudzu and then lay it in a pit and then layer it with miscanthus grass, and that actually has a bacteria on it that causes the kudzu to ferment. And actually, we've been having more success just putting it in a bucket, not even cooking it. Actually, we compared side by side last year. We just do an anaerobic fermentation, so there's no oxygen in there. We just put it in a bucket, put the lid on, wait a couple weeks, and then it's fermented. And basically, the fermentation process just kind of breaks the vines down a little bit, so you can seprate the.
It's just bacterial layers. Action, basically.
Right.
But yeah. You don't seed it with any kind of culture.
Yeah. Probably could.
I might experiment. Some might be faster than others. Or
well, yeah. Well, and that's and one of the this way that Justin's describing yields these long golden fibers. They almost look like the ribbon dental floss, that are like 6 or 8 feet long. But and the traditional way that those are used in cloth making pre-industrially is then those are tied end to end with a special little knot to create a spool. But then that knot limits the usefulness of the fiber in looming because it can't be the warp on the loom when you have knots on it that interrupt pulling the weft down. So it's only used for the weft then. You have to use some other fiber like silk or cotton or flax fiber on the warp. So it also is very labor intensive to tie those knots together. So I did read that they were in somewhere in a university in Tennessee, they were working with enzymatic digestion of the fibers to break them into smaller pieces so that it could be spun like other fibers like wool or cotton are spun into continuous yarn or string.
Why would you need smaller fibers for that?
Because they would have to be kind of frayed and broken open so they can latch together in a continuous staggered fiber pattern in order to be spun. Think about cotton. It's like you need
cotton. But you informed me that cotton is difficult.
Well, you don't want it too short. Okay. Right, yeah, you want it in a medium, right. That's true. If cotton fibers are too short, then they run out before they have time to get bound up. But if they're too long, then it's too long to get that staggered fiber thing that creates a continuous strength. So anyway, they could be that what prompted that was you saying, do they introduce a culture? And it could be that we could have certain fungal or bacterial cultures that we would introduce that would break the fiber down and make it more workable on a cottage industry scale in terms of spinning. Yeah, and I did manage to spin some at last Kudzu Vine Camp by chopping the fibers and then pounding them to make them soft and pliable, and then spinning them on a drop spindle.
Instead of retting?
No, after.
After retting.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, if for any of our viewers who are fiber artists who can go deep into that together, come to Kudzu Vine Camp. Oh, did you bring the cloth by any chance?
I didn't.
Oh, we actually have some pieces of kudzu fiber cloth that were made by Melanie Wilder, professor.
That way we could have had some fiber optics.
Some fiber optics, exactly.
Okay.
But we do have cloth that was made locally from kudzu fiber that we harvested and processed. So it is possible to do it.
So what's the next? What's the status of the Kudzu Co-op at this point?
Yeah, it's in its infancy, and we're kind of approaching it really gently and slowly, and just kind of seeing where it goes. So the pattern we're setting up is we have Kudzu Root Camp in the winter, and then Kudzu Vine Camp in the summer, and in between we'll have 1 or 2 meetings, and we'll see how it evolves. If this grant does come through, it's going to kind of jumpstart us and cause us to have to put more time into it, which will be great.
Yeah.
But as it stands, we're kind of slowly developing. So right now we've got probably a half dozen to 8 of us who are either committed to making it happen or very interested.
Yeah.
And then maybe another half dozen people who have expressed interest, and I think once we have something for them to engage with, they'll probably be able to join.
So you want to start with a critical mass of like a dozen people?
Probably a dozen.
Yeah, a dozen or maybe 15.
13.
Yeah, 13, right. And so if for people who are interested who might be watching this, the first step really is to get in touch with us via kudzuculture.net, and also to come to Kudzu Camp and get to know everyone that way. And then I think we would be open to people who are really motivated and committed, and fell in love with Kudzu, to add some members to the co-op. Or there's certain skill sets that are missing from the co-op to make a well-rounded whole. Promotions, we need people who are really good at getting the word out about events and about Kudzu roots, and helping to just spread the Kudzu word by the vine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I think someone, like we were saying earlier, someone who's mechanically inclined, who could tinker around with different ways to mechanize certain steps in the process.
Technology.
Yeah.
Also researchers, because we definitely have a research focus. We've been tracking different data, for instance, the ratio of labor to kudzu starch yield, and the ratio of kudzu roots harvested to kudzu starch yield, and we actually did some research on the learning of participants in Kudzu Camp a couple years ago. And so there are many kinds of research that need to be done around both the cultural, the economic, and the kind of biophysical aspects of this endeavor. And so people who have experience with designing research well and implementing it and following through on it would be really helpful to be part of the Kudzu Co-op.
Yeah, and then Asian language specialists, translators,
seriously,
help us translate.
That's true.
Existing research, and help us correspond with people who are working Kudzu in those places.
In Taiwan, Japan, China, Korea. Those are the languages.
This is something we didn't touch on in this conversation, and we've rarely touched on in the past, is kudzu as fuel. And one of the things we've talked about is kudzu, making alcohol out of kudzu for drinking, actually.
Yeah.
But it's also possible, or something to be explored, about whether or not it would be feasible for fuel for different machines and things like that, or automobiles maybe. Part of the problem with making alcohol out of corn, for instance, and other crops, is that you have to take into account the energy expended in growing the crop,
right?
Which is
significant.
which is very significant.
Sometimes it makes it a net zero sum. I mean, or net negative sum.
Even net negative for many so-called biofuels.
Yeah.
And so you're eliminating that whole part of the equation with kudzu. You don't have to do anything to make it grow. You don't have to add any chemical, petroleum-based fertilizers or anything, no pesticides, none of that.
And then it's improving the soil while it grows.
So the only part of that equation is still there. Is it takes energy to harvest. That's another whole aspect of and not just fuel, but many of the other derivatives that you get from extracted fossil fuels like coal and oil. A lot of plastics that we use, for instance, are derived from that. A lot of chemicals, cleaning products, things like that are derived from petroleum, can also be derived from the process of manufacturing charcoal, for instance. Wood-based chemicals are very, very similar to the chemicals you find in petroleum products. You may get turpentine instead of benzene, or something like that. So that's another, again, because of the prolific nature of kudzu, is something that could be considered another aspect of that resource. And that's totally unexplored as far as we know. But,
agreed.
Yeah. So what's next? Where are we going from here?
Kudzu Vine Camp, I guess, is the next thing. I mean, we still got a couple weeks of processing, of refining the kudzu starch that we have in our settling vat right now.
We got the article up online for people who want to learn more, right?
Which article?
The article. The handout.
The handout. I don't think it's on the website yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be on the website.
So if anyone wanted to learn more about some of the details of what we've been kind of skipping over, you can email us at kudzuculture.net to get this handout.
And we'll develop the website out a little bit further soon.
And again, this is totally pioneering. I don't know. I don't think there's any other groups. There are other people who have expressed interest, obviously, in kudzu. In one aspect of it, I think there are people in South Carolina who are making isn't there a whole museum of kudzu down in
in North Georgia. Jolene, Nancy Baskett's daughter.
Nancy Basket is her name.
And her daughter also.
And she makes baskets. Right. And that's what they focus on is the vine and making.
And then out in Rutherford County, there's Kudzu Cow Farm, and they cut and bale kudzu and sell it.
Right. So, some of the more traditional, I guess, uses of kudzu, but they haven't really delved into the whole plant and tried to proliferate the culture of kudzu, as well as the plant of the kudzu.
Right. That's what we're trying to do.
So this is new, and it's exciting. I mean, to me, it's exciting. I think it's something that's long overdue, and is really a potential entrepreneurship for potentially many people. Anybody who lives with kudzu and considers it a problem probably should be interested in what you're doing.
It has access to kudzu patches that are in unpolluted locations and exactly.
Absolutely.
And I could start buying out kudzu patches as well, because you got your land because it was affordable back in the early '80s because it had kudzu on it.
Well, that's true. That's a story worth telling. I mean, when I first moved to Jackson County, North Carolina, in 1983. You could buy pieces of land like the one I did. I bought 3 acres of land with an old farmhouse on it for $12,000. Which and they laughed at me. They thought they were getting a good deal, because the owner thought, well, this piece of land is gone. It's wasted. The house was overgrown with kudzu. The garden, everything. There was nothing but kudzu, and they considered a piece of useless land at that point. And
little did they know.
Little did they know what they had. That's right. I had the last laugh. And the last laugh has yet to be laughed.
Yes, may there be many more laughs. But no, seriously, that's now like an 80-year-old kudzu patch. And so,
right.
which means there are large, really beautiful roots there to be harvested, and it's amazing to see in myself the shift in perspective after having grown up on this land. And then as we've gotten deeper into this kudzu culture experiment, to see how my perspective has truly shifted, so that when I look at a kudzu patch, I don't see a giant weed infestation. I see a giant ally and resource, and all the roots living under the ground. We just dug 300 pounds of roots from a 20-foot by 30-foot section of kudzu, and we didn't even get them all. So it's just so much food, so much abundance.
And one thing I have learned in this process in the last 35 years or so is that it's not so difficult to control, even without.
That's right.
I mean, without chemicals. I've never used chemicals on the land, but just manually clearing the. Once you have a cleared area, keeping the kudzu off that area is not that difficult. It's got these long, soft vines that you simply move off the area you don't want them to grow before they take root. And you have to keep on top of it like any other weed. I mean, if you leave any piece of land untended, it's going to become overgrown very rapidly in this climate by all kinds of noxious weeds.
Exactly.
From privet to honeysuckle and poison ivy.
Bermuda grass, mugwort, buttercup.
We could probably name 100 different things that will overtake that land. Well, of all those plants, kudzu is probably the easiest to manually leave. I mean, it's very. as soon as you hit it with a machete, it dies. You know, I mean, the green part.
Yeah. Well, we should also mention about there's a myth that kudzu will grow from any chunk of root.
Yeah.
And this is really important for everyone to know in case you ever are in a situation where you do need to eradicate kudzu, that's not true. It doesn't grow from any chunk of root like some plants do, like Bermuda grass or mugwort or even black locust trees will do. But rather, there's the crown, which is where the root tissue transitions to the vine tissue right at the surface or just below the surface of the ground. If you cut that crown off, it's like the head. It's like cutting the head off of an animal. The entire root below ground will then die because it doesn't have the ability to form vine tissue from the root. It has to have that crown. That's what the vines emerge from. So you can literally, even if you had a flat place growing with kudzu and you wanted to kill a bunch of kudzu, you could use a tractor implement that would go along and cut all the crowns 4 or 6 inches below the soil surface, and that would kill the vast majority of the plants. So that's good for everyone to know, is that you can actually go along and just snip them with a hand pruners below the crown, and they'll die, and the roots will rot in the ground, and by the way, offer nutrients and organic matter and soil and air, or water and air pathways down into the soil for soil improvement. So that's actually, I agree with you, it's a lot more.
And so when we bought this land, like, again, it was totally covered with kudzu. Every inch of this 3 acres of land was covered with kudzu. And in the first year, we cleared an area. We cleared that. We took it all off the house that was existing. We cleared a big garden area and a whole plateau above the house. And then we actually had a bulldozer come in and clear a house, and we built a new house up there. And for 30-something years, we've kept that whole area clean, free of kudzu. And the rest of it's still there, and we live with that, and we have to clear it off. But it just wasn't that difficult to do. And most of the time, I've done it just by myself. And so, just more of the mythology of kudzu to overcome,
to untangle.
Yeah,
to untangle.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think that about covers it. We about covered it up in vines.
We have inundated the subject.
Can I repeat the dates for Vine Camp? They're July 20, 21, 22.
Which is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, we'll share meals and we'll hang out in the kudzu patch and in the creek and cook a lot of foods prepared with kudzu root starch that we made just this past weekend.
And other stuff.
And other stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll eat some other foods other than
Yeah, and maybe we'll even have some kudzu wine. We did this time.
We'll see. Yeah, kudzu mead,
Try some kudzu leaves and flowers.
There'll be lots of puns involving kudzu.
There's a lot of puns, right? A lot of funs and puns.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so you can email us at kudzuculture@gmail.net. That's
.com.
Gmail.com.
Yeah.
Kudzuculture.net. Kudzuculture@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For more
That's the way to be in touch.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this morning.
You're welcome.
News
Thanks
from
for having
the
us.
Roots. This is one of the true
News from the roots.
news from the Roots.
Feel
Right?
at home here.
Yeah. And
for having
hopefully
us.
we'll have you back on for an update before, during, or after Kudzu Vine Camp.
Yeah, great.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks.